All right. Welcome, everyone. My name is Eli Storch, the chair of the Design Advocacy Group, and it's a pleasure to have everyone here for our April monthly meeting on the Philly Tree Plan. So as you come in, stay on mute. If you have any events, announcements, updates, gallery exhibitions, anything that's coming up that you want to share with us, please throw it in the chat, and I'll ask you to unmute, tell us a little more about it. I would like to, we're going to try something again that we used to do when we were in person, and we'll do the Zoom version of it, where I'm going to ask everyone to introduce themselves. And by introduce themselves, I think it'll be a nightmare if you unmute. So please put your name in the chat and give us the reason why you came here today, whether it's because you like DAG's monthly meetings or because you want to see this specific program, but please put your name, put a little bit about why you're here today in the chat so that we can get people engaged and see why everyone has shown up this morning. So, as I mentioned, please keep yourself muted throughout. It helps our audio quality. And if you have any technical difficulties, please message them my way, and I will do my best to help you during the presentation. Typically, our DAG meetings have been off the record, but because of our ability to save them and share them with the broader audience, we've decided to record them. And all of that is available going back all the way to September of 2020. I'll put those in the chat here. There are a few links that you can go to and take a look at past DAG presentations, both on YouTube and through our website. So take a look at those, see what's there. There's all sorts of broad-ranging topics. So yeah, take a look, see what you see, and we'll go from there. Good to see all of the folks signing in, saying hi. Please continue to drop your name and the reason why you're here today into the chat. So before we get further in, I wanted to pass it over to the inimitable Marcia Moss to tell us a little bit about what's coming up at DAG for our next meeting.
Okay, thanks, Eli, and good morning, everyone. So in just a couple of years, the Central Delaware River waterfront will be connected to the rest of the city by an amazing park at Penn's Landing. The new public space will bridge over I-95 and slope downward to reconnect Old City to the river. Richard Mayman, partner at Kieran Timberlake, Mary Margaret Jones, president and CEO at Hargraves Jones, and Lizzie Woods, a vice president at DRWC, will be sharing the most recent design plan just prior to its presentation to the Philadelphia Art Commission. So this will be an important program, and I hope that you'll all join us. That's May 19th at 10 a.m. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Marcia. So a little bit of other items and what DAG's working on. As many folks who follow DAG and city issues know, there is an ongoing question about streeteries, outdoor dining in the city of Philadelphia, and what's to become of it. There is a plan to make it permanent. We'll call it semi-permanent, since it can be updated at any moment, as we've learned. So DAG's Streeteries Working Group, we have a document that is written and has some recommendations in it. We'll be continuing to grow that, but we're waiting to see. It was supposed to be in March, and then it was supposed to be in April, but we're waiting to see what the city is going to put out there in terms of new regulations for restaurants, and whether they'll incorporate the feedback that's come from a mixture of the restaurant community, the design community, and general city residents who have had a lot of questions and concerns about what the city proposed. So if you're interested in learning more about that, email dagfellow@gmail.com. That'll get you looped in, and we can introduce you to our group and what we've been working on. And also, if you missed our Streeteries evening event, go to those links that I put in the chat. You can watch that that evening sort of working conversation session there, which was a lot of fun, and a lot of people came out and shared a bunch of impressions and thoughts on that. So with that, I would love to jump into our presentation today and pass the mic over to Tavis Dockwiller, Viridian Studio, who is a DAG steering committee member, an excited landscape architect, and I heard recently that she was the funniest landscape architect in the city of Philadelphia. So well, Tavis, take it over. Over to you.
There's no pressure there, is there? Well, my job here today really is to act as moderator for Q&A. So I'm happy if people have questions along the way. I'm happy to have them go into the chat if some of you are more shy, and I can convey those at the end. But I am really delighted to introduce to you Ari Miller and Alexa Bossi of Hinge Collective. I've known both of them a really long time. Hinge Collective is really working hard, not only to make great spaces, but to really listen to people and figure out what people want in their great spaces. There are all sorts of accolades that we could give, but I really want to get to this presentation, and they're going to talk to us today about the tree plan for Philadelphia, which I think is a long time in the works before they were commissioned for this plan, and it will certainly be a long time in the works after their commission is over, and it will be really up to us to help them to make this successful, and up to all of the people that they've engaged. So with that, Ari and Alexa, please take it away. And if you want to say something else that I missed about you, do it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tavis. I'm Alexa Bossi. Ari's also here. He's going to be helping make sure that I don't forget anything in this presentation. I'm going to share my screen. All right. Hopefully you guys can all see that. So I just want to thank you guys at DAG for having us here. I love the opportunity to sort of share some of the work in front of some more design professionals, and it looks like there's some other folks that are all passionate about trees here. I'll call out to Chattanooga. I'm from Nashville, Tennessee, so I love having a little bit of Tennessee here in this meeting. So thanks for attending. Philadelphians too. All right, so I'll talk a little bit about the Philly Tree Plan, which hopefully you guys have been hearing about over the last year plus. We've been working on it, and as Tavis mentioned, we're going to focus this talk on our community-centered engagement that was part of this plan. So Hinge Collective, just as a little intro, we sort of shorthand, we refer to ourselves as a public interest architecture practice. We are design professionals, architects, landscape architects, and planners, but we really want our work to focus on listening and responding and making sure that every neighborhood has quality public spaces for everyone, regardless of zip code. So here we are. We're passionate for community engagement and socially conscious design here at Hinge Collective. So the tree plan. I'm starting up here with the mission of the tree plan, which, as Tavis mentioned, there was a lot of work done on this before we were commissioned to start working on this. And one of those was the development of this mission plan, this mission statement. So this is, the goal of it was to establish a 10-year strategic plan for the planting and care of the urban forest, guided by values of environmental justice, community engagement, and sustainability. The city, specifically Parks and Rec, that was leading this, chose to emphasize environmental justice in their mission because they recognized that a huge part of the work in creating this plan was going to be listening. trees are a source of joy, and they're also a source of stress for Philadelphians. But we also know that healthy and well cared for trees are really crucial to the mental and physical health of residents here in the city. But given that trees do cause problems, we know that the goal of the Philly Tree Plan is to bring the benefits of trees to these communities in ways that they need them the most and in ways that support them the best. I will elaborate on that a little bit more. So Philadelphia has trees in a lot of places. One of the things that I thought was really interesting when we started this plan is we started talking to people about the urban forest, right? What is an urban forest? What does that mean? And you know, the trees that are part of our urban forest are in places where they are desirable and where they are cherished. And they are also in places where they are not desirable and not cherished, right? So those trees that are growing in alleyways or out of gutters, all of those also part of the urban forest as we're looking at it now. So through this planning effort, we looked at the entire urban forest, including some of these things that I had up on the slide. I also want to point out that, you know, trees in Philadelphia are not spread equally across the city. Where there are trees and where there are not trees is, I'm sure, as you guys all know, is really due to past and ongoing policies and practices that keep funding and support out of Black and brown neighborhoods. And it also puts the burden of advocating for this justice on the backs of neighbors, right? So we've been talking about this notion throughout the entire planning process and trying to find ways that this plan can help reduce that burden. So going back in time a little bit before this plan started, in 2019, the city of Philadelphia commissioned a study with the US Forestry Service to map the current tree canopy cover so that they could get a better understanding of where the tree canopy was growing and where it was decreasing over the past decade. So this was a study looking at 2008 to 2018. In this study, they found that Philadelphia has a 20% canopy cover citywide. This is an average citywide. It is not equal. Some neighborhoods have a 3% cover, some have a 45% cover. So the 20% is an average cover. There have been goals set forth in Greenworks and other places looking at this, saying that a desirable canopy cover in the city of Philadelphia would be 30%. And so we want to recognize that we are currently only at 20. The second piece of data that came from the study was that the canopy actually decreased by 6% over that same 10-year period, which is not a good direction to be moving in, especially with all of the work and tree giveaways and wonderful things that, you know, a lot of different partners have been doing. We are still seeing a decrease in tree canopy cover in the city. There's also some issues about tree equity. You know, tree equity has really been getting a lot of attention, I think, since during COVID in the last few years. Also in sort of the growing climate change crisis have been highlighting and exacerbating the inequities between the people who have resources to care for trees and the people that don't. So this is just a screenshot of I said recent, it's been a little while now, of an op-ed in the New York Times that was put together by an advocacy organization, American Forests, that uses a map of Philadelphia to illustrate the point of the inequities of trees in American cities. Philadelphia is not the only city that is like this. It's sadly quite universal, but Philadelphia is a very good example because it is so easy to see, which here's some of our mapping that we did as well. You can see that there are fewer trees where there is more poverty. And there are also fewer trees in Black and brown neighborhoods, as you can see here. You can sort of start to see in this tree canopy cover how some neighborhoods have 45% and others only have 3. But the other really important issue that I want to bring up is that there is a 22-degree heat difference between the hottest part of the city and the coolest part of the city on a hot summer day. And the difference is trees, right? Heat, and amongst other things, one of the factors is trees. You know, heat is a cause of serious illness and death in communities with extreme summer temperatures. 22 degrees can literally be the difference between life and death. And these places, as I showed in the previous ones, are already experiencing poverty, and the cost of cooling can be a significant burden in these neighborhoods as well. So, as I mentioned, you know, these patterns, they're due to both past and ongoing practices and decisions that have intentionally cut people from having trees or failed to support people to allow them to keep the trees that they have in place. So in Philadelphia and many other US cities, there's a number of reasons why there are trees in certain neighborhoods and not in others. And we've put together sort of a larger presentation, which I'll talk to earlier if you want to dive into this, or feel free to ask me questions about it later. But I wanted to put these all in place to sort of set the stage before we started talking about the engagement process that we had with the city, because I think that the number one step that we felt was important to do both with the city and as our consultant team was to acknowledge how we got to how we are now so that we can start moving forward together, right? So development patterns, barriers to access for certain groups, racist policies and lending practices, disinvestment, reliance on volunteers to care for trees, and more. These were all things that we heard as part of the engagement. But also what this has done is it has seeded distrust in trees and institutions in Philadelphia. So we knew going into this tree plan that if we wanted to strive for equity in our canopy and in the urban forest, we first needed to learn the stories of people and getting direct input from Philadelphia on the troubles and the concerns that they have with trees in order to create tree equity and a happier and healthier Philadelphia. So we began this process at the beginning of 2021. So this was very, very much a pandemic process that we tried to figure out the best way to have Zoom and in person and meet with different groups. But our task was to talk to an entire city about trees and the urban forest, which we spent the past year doing. So I'm going to talk about these sort of 7 different strategies that we took. There were subs within all of these that I will try not to elaborate on too much, but you can ask me questions if I leave anything out at the end of this. But one of the ways that we knew that we could talk to the most people was by creating a variety of opportunities for people to participate, right? Some people might want to, you know, dive in and join our team for 6 weeks, as we did with the ambassadors, while other people might want to just, you know, take a picture on Instagram and tag it, and in 30 seconds they're done, right? And then all of the places in between. So our goal for these engagement strategies was to make it easy for everyone to participate in the way that they wanted to participate. And I'll walk through all of these. So we began this process with a Community Voices Steering Committee. These were 28 residents that were here to help us talk about the best ways to communicate with folks in their community and the issues that they were already facing. So these were community leaders, active residents, and we met regularly over the first 6 months of this process. They really held us accountable to everything we said we were going to be doing. They gave us guidance and oversight on the plan. And they also, most importantly, helped us develop every aspect of this engagement process. So they helped make sure that the 7 things I just mentioned, we're going to do the right things that we were doing. and then helped us to oversee the development of the plan. As we were working with that Community Voices Committee, one of the first things that we did was try to identify some geographic prioritization. So this was developed in collaboration with the Community Voices Steering Committee. It went through many iterations of making sure that we were identifying the right things that we needed to be looking at in order to figure out where are the areas in the neighborhood that are in the city that are the most vulnerable and that would benefit the most from increased tree canopy. So, so the key focus of this planning process was really trying to figure out what were those variables in order to identify the priority areas. You can see this as a very simplified graphic saying that we were looking at some of the issues that I mentioned earlier, so people experiencing greater poverty, health, and this health, you're going to correct me if I am wrong, but it is looking at asthma, COPD, heat vulnerability. Actually, heat vulnerability is the next one, and heat, ER visits, deaths, and as well as sort of like the mental stress and mental health issues are all sort of factored into this health map. All three of these, and then heat, looking at that 22-degree heat difference, all of these were combined together to create what's on the right, which we're calling our priority map. And this priority map, it helped us guide our engagement, as well as many of the recommendations that we are making in the plan, because we know that in order to sort of reach tree equity, we need to be paying special attention to some of the neighborhoods that have had the least attention paid to them in the past. So we began, I had neighborhood ambassadors as part of this plan. So we hired 22 ambassadors from 5 different neighborhoods. And as you could probably guess, those 5 neighborhoods were identified using the priority map. Our Community Voices Steering Committee helped us reach out into those neighborhoods to find the right people that could talk to us. I want to stress for these ambassadors that they were not ambassadors for trees, they were ambassadors for their neighborhood. So we asked them to join our design team and tell us everything they hated about trees, everything they hated about the experience of trees, or the things they loved about them, right? We didn't want to sort of go in and have people proselytize about why trees were important, because the value of the ambassadors for this project, for the design team, for us, was to really find out what were the things that people, what were the things that were keeping people from having more trees, or what were the reasons that people were taking down trees? Like all these things that we knew were happening because we knew that there was this 6% decrease in tree canopy. What were the reasons that that was happening? And so these 22 different ambassadors, we met weekly for 6 weeks. And we had some very heated discussions, which I loved every aspect of. People got mad, people got sad, people got happy. It was all good discussions. I think 6 weeks could have been longer always, but I think it was enough time for us to, in small groups begin to develop a relationship with these folks that I hope to be, will continue into the future. They, each of the ambassadors, they sort of had three parts of their assignment, for lack of a better word, that they were doing with us. But they began obviously talking to us about their own perceptions, but then they also conducted interviews of their neighbors, of their family members, of their kids. We actually worked with some high school students at Strawberry Mansion High, but we had a teacher as well, and she interviewed her elementary school students for us. So we, in Southwest. So we ended up with these wonderful interviews, and we workshopped the interview questions with the ambassadors at one of our meetings to try to think, what are the things that we were interested in talking about? What are the questions that we want answered? How do we really identify people's relationships to trees. Because at the end of all of this engagement was really about identifying relationships with trees. And so the other benefit of these ambassadors conducting the interviews is they were conducting interviews with people that they knew, people that they were possibly related to, so there was already trust within that interview relationship that allowed people to really open up and be very blatant about what it is that they liked or didn't like about trees. So it provided an opportunity for us as a design team, and design are always sort of not of the neighborhood, right? Like, unless I was asking somebody here on the corner where I live, I am going to be sort of other. So this allowed us an opportunity to really hear from neighbors and residents about their issues with trees. They recorded these different interviews. So we did get the opportunity to listen to those interviews, but the ambassadors also sort of took notes on what were the key takeaways and specific quotes that they felt were really important. So we had all of the information from them. We also went on neighborhood workshops with each of the ambassador neighborhoods. So I said it was 5 different neighborhoods. This is us on 52nd Street in Cobbs Creek. We walked with folks from the city, Tree Philly, as well as an arborist, and we worked with photographer Sahar Costin Hardy with the ambassadors. So we actually provided portraits for each of the ambassadors just for them to have, as well as she walked them through some, intro to smartphone photography. So all of the ambassadors, in addition to the interviews, they also all provided these sort of like visual representations, again, of their relationship to trees. So I'll get to that. So in these workshops, the ambassadors helped us identify where we were going to walk in each neighborhood. And then we sort of walked around. We looked at empty tree pits. We looked at trees growing in alleys. We looked at trees growing out of gutters. We looked at places where why weren't there more trees there already? And we sort of had an opportunity to talk through all of that. These are some of our students from Strawberry Mansion High, which they just like loved all of the hands-on and wanted to, learn and ID all the different trees. We had a great time with them.
The guy you keep seeing talking to them is Herb White, who is the urban forestry manager at the city of Wilmington, but is a Philadelphia resident, longtime North Philadelphia resident. So, and a friend of ours. So he was really great at helping to talk about all the different issues that he could see and sort of demystify some of the things that we were seeing about trees. And he's been living in cities and thinking about trees for most of his life. So that was really excellent. I just want to give him a little shout out there.
Of course, right, Herb. It's really great to see, Herb he's, as Ari said, he's been thinking about trees his entire life and living in the city his entire life. He had some great stories to share with folks about, he lived on a street with no trees, but his grandmother's house had trees, and what was that about, right? So that also thinking about the inequities of cities and where they are and where they aren't has been near and dear to his heart for a long time. Here's us in South Philly, Gross Ferry area, our ambassadors. And here's just a few of the images that our ambassadors produced where they were sort of describing their relationship with trees. The one on the right, which is this, I loved it. Our ambassador who took this actually thought that it was so beautiful with the sunset in the back. But this is often an experience that we all have in the city of how do trees and utilities coexist, right? The image on the left was someone celebrating their 100th birthday, and this whole party was, up against the edge of the park under the shade of the tree. So she took that. And then at the end of the 6 weeks, we were able to celebrate the work that the ambassadors did with an in-person event with pretzels and water ice and all the fun things that you do when you get together if you haven't gotten together with people in 2 years. which is where we were last summer. And you know, we got to show the images that people had, the sort of big themes and takeaways that we had taken from the ambassadors. And the ambassadors continue to be, while their sort of like 6-week paid period is up, they continue to, you know, check in with us pretty regularly to make sure that we're doing what we should be doing, which I always appreciate. All right, another strategy that we had is the survey, and I hope everybody here filled out the survey. We did reach, we had over 7,000 folks that responded to it. We translated it into 8 different languages, so 9 total, including English, which we found to be really interesting and helpful, actually, to be able to spread it to other folks that might not have participated in it had it only been in English. Obviously, most of our responses came in English, but having the option, I think, is really wonderful. We made some yard signs, which here you can have our love trees or hate trees. We'll get to this later. We found that nobody really hates trees, but we wanted them to, so that they would like really tell us what was going wrong. But we had these surveys put up. We spread it through, you know, we had our Community Voices Committee. We had a very large project team that the city had put together. So we did have the benefit of this being spread through social media and sort of digital ways very widely. One thing that we did discover, and I think anyone who's ever conducted a survey would know this already, most of the survey responses that we got were from white people, mostly female, mostly aged 30 to 50. So basically me, I fill out every survey that comes into my inbox, and apparently everyone else like me does that. So we did about a month into the survey, we looked at the demographic data, and we were like, this isn't quite what we need. And so we did another push in the priority neighborhoods. So again, going back to that prioritization map that we made in the beginning, we put these yard signs in the parks and rec centers of priority areas. We did some phone banking. We hired some more folks that were in the priority neighborhoods to do the phone banking. We sent out a bunch of text messages. We put out a bunch of door hangers, and we got a lot more responses from those priority neighborhoods. So you can see that of those 7,000 plus survey responses that we got, 60% of them did come from neighborhoods that were sort of highlighted in that orange of the priority map, which was better than it was to start with. So I think one of the things that I'll say with surveys in general is you should never rely only on a survey to get all of your information about a community, because surveys are going to be filled out by some people, but not all people. So we love having all this information from the survey, but we made sure that we weighed the emphasis of all of these other engagement strategies equally, so that we were getting input from all different types of residents in the city. All right. We also had a virtual open house, as we called it. I mentioned that we started this in the middle of the total shutdown, everybody working from home. I love a good open house. I love a good block party. I think that any opportunity to get people together and actually have conversations, as opposed to sort of a presentation where we're going to stand and tell you what we're doing and you can respond if you want to, is really beneficial for getting feedback from folks. Because we were not able to have an in-person open house, we ended up taking some of these presentations. So there's 3 presentations here. One is sort of talking about what the urban forest is. The other one was talking about the unfair forest. So it's a more elaborated version of what I started this presentation with, sort of talking about the reasons that the forest is how it is, which is not equitably distributed. And then another presentation talking about the plan. We created an online site, which you guys can still go here. It's still there. that had these presentations on it, as well as links to the survey, the Instagram challenge, all of these other things I'm talking about. And we had a lot of folks that came through and left comments, and we gathered those comments and got, which was I think most surprising to me, a lot of questions from teachers asking if they could steal our presentations and use them. So I love that some of these presentations also moved on to other places and were shared even further than we necessarily realize. Another strategy were these community meetings. So we were fortunate enough to have a community organizer from Parks and Rec that was able to join our team. And she went to 32 different community meetings twice. So I guess 64 different community meetings. These were community meetings that were already happening. So rather than holding a tree plan meeting, she went to meetings that were monthly meetings that were already happening, that already had attendance, in order to talk about what was happening. So the first time she went to all of these meetings, it was just sort of an open discussion to find out what people's thoughts, understand relationships, but also let people know about the survey and about the sort of like different ways that they could get involved. And then she went back a second time to present the draft of the tree plan and get responses to that, which we are still responding to now. So the tree plan is still being reviewed and commented on. So unfortunately, I can't end this presentation by showing you the whole tree plan, but hopefully it won't be too much longer. So these meetings took a lot of time, but also produced so much information for us to respond to and to work from. And then also stakeholder workshops. I think that these stakeholder workshops might sort of fall back into the category of your traditional engagement practices. We had 7 different topic-based workshops where we met with people over sort of like a 2-hour Zoom meeting to talk about a slightly different conversation for each one, right? So we had a meeting with allies and advocates. We had a meeting with sort of like the development community, meetings with campuses and public spaces. So we had these 7 different meetings where it was an opportunity to have these smaller conversations about what are the pinch points, what are the areas that are hardest for you to manage, what are the things that this plan can do that can either help these different organizations meet their goals or make it easier for these organizations to meet those goals. So again, lots of information from that. And then this last strategy that we have on here was the Instagram challenge. So Philly Tree Stories, if you guys want to check out Philly Tree Stories hashtag, we got some really, really excellent stories that I'm gonna admit, this might be sort of like a problem with my current job, but some of them some really emotional stories across the board, actually, even in this survey, the citywide survey, we had place for people to share stories. We specifically asked for connections to culture, connections to other spaces. So we asked, there were you could get through the survey quickly if you didn't want to write any long stories. But people also spent a lot of time working on that survey. Ari, I don't have the stats for how much time people spent on it, but the tree stories were the same in that people shared some really heartfelt stories about specific trees or specific areas or specific times that their life changed perhaps because of the relationship with the urban forest. This was our first place award winner. We had a Sahar Kostanhardy, who I mentioned, who is the photographer on our team. She compiled a great jury of other photographers, local photographers in Philly, to look at all of the images that came in. I got to be a fly on the wall as they were jurying that, and it was fascinating, just from my perspective, I'd spent so much time with tree people and people that were really passionate about trees. It was wonderful to hear people that perhaps weren't quite as embedded in trees to talk about these, how the stories were being told through them. But this first place winner is a kid eating June berries. All right, great, June berries. Here are some of our other second, third, and audience choice winner. I think one of the fun parts, again, that we did on the virtual open house was after the jury picked the first, second, third, they picked 10 others for honorable mention. And then we put those 10 up for folks to vote on. So we got more votes than we did submissions. So, but that drove all of those people to the open house. So hopefully they saw some other things as well. I wanted to pull out some of these stories. This was a very long story that I loved, of the Belmont maple, which is no longer, it was just removed recently, but of an experience of this woman who was moving here and sort of felt very much that the tree was welcoming her with open arms. This I love because really this Instagram is just asking for help in naming this new tree, but sort of a celebration of new plants in the yard and a new tree in front. And you can start to see the excitement that this is, I mean, when you plant a tree in front of your house, it's sort of like another child, right? You're definitely taking on a responsibility to that. So seeing the excitement. And then also just celebrating how tough trees are. Growing through anything. So what did we learn? I think our biggest takeaway and the most important takeaway is that trees mean a lot to Philadelphians, right? I'm gonna move to this next one. This is a long quote, and I apologize for putting this on a slide. But this was actually a quote from a Next City article that they pulled by Erica Smith-Fitchman, who has been our brave leader at Parks and Rec throughout this process. But she said there's this perception that you either love trees or you hate trees, and that you have to convince people, right? There's a lot of literature that says, here are the benefits of trees, here's why you should want trees. Do you know that trees are good for all of these reasons? And the thing that we found in our engagement is that there aren't people that sort of love trees and hate trees. There are people that love trees and have the resources to have trees in their lives. And then there are people that 100% understand the value of trees, but they just don't feel like they can afford them at the very basic level to have a tree on their property. So again, going back here, trees are really important. And we found that there were not a lot of people that hated trees. There were just a lot of people that didn't want to have to deal with the cracked sidewalks and the possible damage to utilities or into their roots, or like the branches falling or getting too close to the house. And with this, some other takeaways, engagement also pointed towards the need for trust building, access to programs, need for clarity in addressing these different goals. But some of the other takeaways, people recognize the value of trees, and trees are an enormous burden to homeowners. There is the disparity, which you only have to look at a map to see the disparity, but we heard throughout our engagement that you can tell when you're in a white neighborhood because there's trees, and you cross the street and they're not anymore. And this sort of lived experience was mentioned over and over and over again. So it's not just looking at sort of like the 30,000 foot view of where the canopy is in the city and where it is not. It feels very personal on the ground for a lot of residents, and that's not great. There's also a need, I mentioned trust building, there's also a need to sort of take care of the trees that we have in order to start building trust within communities, right? Unfortunately, Parks and Rec is pretty underfunded. And while Parks and Rec is responsible for maintaining public trees, so street trees and trees on public land, they have a backlog of those service requests. And they are service requests. So they respond to 311 requests of trees that need assistance, and it can take a while for them to get out there. And because of this, a lot of residents say, I don't want a new tree. My neighbor has a tree that needs work. Why should I get a new one when this other one isn't being properly cared for? So maintenance of the existing canopy is crucial in order to build trust to start growing that canopy. But the growing has to come next. So we have, from these big takeaways, we've formed the plan in these sort of 8 community-informed goals, which are, within each of these goals, there are policy suggestions, there's operational suggestions, there's a lot of requests for funding. But just to go through these, the first one is to start to coordinate support for trees. And this is going to be through having one sort of like a main city advocate for trees, but also there are so many organizations that are doing wonderful work. And oftentimes they're all reinventing the wheel. I think this is sort of perhaps the story in all cities or all organizations where coordinating that work together and will allow everyone to do more. The second one is protecting the existing and future urban forest. So we need to make sure that tree mortality is reduced so that when trees are planted, they actually stay. And when there's old trees that are around, they should be protected. There's, in a lot of the analysis that we did, and many times that the most growth that can happen in the urban forest is the canopy growth comes from the growth of existing trees, not necessarily from planting new trees. So maintaining and protecting existing trees so that they can grow larger is also super crucial. Obviously, growing the urban forest equitably across the city. I don't think I need to elaborate on that one. We've been talking about that this whole presentation. Reducing the burden of trees on residents. We have several recommendations that will perhaps make that easier. Investing in people and communities. We're working with a lot of organizations that have workforce development, but even if it's not workforce development, finding opportunities for folks to participate in taking care of trees. The things that don't require high skill, there are opportunities for residents to be paid for those types of things, which will also then help them have more ownership over the trees in their neighborhood. Communication is crucial to building trust across the board. Advocating for communities to benefit from the urban forest. I think that's one of the reasons we're here talking to you guys today, because even once the plan is in place, it's going to require some advocation. And then also celebrating the ways people are already engaging with trees. So here are just sort of some of my big getting input and earning trust that I generally state around engagement practices. Have a purpose for the engagement, acknowledge past mistakes, use plain language, lots of different languages, have fun as much as possible. I've been having fun in this process. Hopefully other folks have too. And that's the end of my presentation. Do you guys have any questions?
Wow, that's fantastic. Let's see if people have some questions, and if no one wants to start off, I can certainly start. Eli, do we usually get a raised hand here, or do people just unmute?
So you got a couple in the chat, and folks can either put them in the chat or raise their hand if they want.
Great.
And then I'll let you drive from there.
Okay. So one of them that came up right away is talking about utilities. Pico was specifically called out. But you know, I think the real question is there is, you know, Parks and Rec cares for the trees, right? But what if these other agencies damage the trees? Have you thought about that, the partnerships or the overlays that are necessary to get them some help and funding?
We talked a lot with representatives from PICO in particular and other utility providers. You know, the biggest challenge with that is the sort of right tree, right place. And a lot of the times the utilities came after the trees with some of those larger trees. So those trees were already there. And but now the way that trees get planted in the right of way is there's actually a permit process. And so there's specific types of trees that you're allowed to plant under wires now. So those types of conflicts should get better. But we learned that a lot of it's about communication with residents about what's happening and what, so that people know that there's pruning coming, explaining what good pruning looks like. All of that stuff communication is almost as important as the actual work. The other thing is that we want to make sure that they're doing work according to best practices. And those of us who understand trees know that that's not always the case. And so we wanted to give residents opportunities to learn about best practices and call that in and kind of be sort of the eyes on the street for what's happening to trees with respect to pruning for you know, root pruning as well as crown pruning, and provide an outlet for people to talk about that and call attention to it if something's not right. So that's kind of the biggest thing. That's the biggest thing with PICO, and they do have a pledge to plant trees, and they do support funding for tree planting, and they will continue to do so. But we need to move forward with them as a partner, not an adversary.
Indeed.
You know, so you know, a lot of it has been more around transparency of what they're doing and communication with the public. For pruning for PICO in particular.
Great. So there are two questions coming up that are similar, and lots of kudos, of course, because it's a great presentation. But the first one is, what are plans to put trees in the neighborhoods? And the next is really linked to it, is where are the trees coming from and who's responsible for installing them? And you know, I think that is always a great question. Lots of cities came up with their million tree initiatives, but you know, no one thought about every nursery bought out. And we even saw it this year in the craziness with Christmas trees that didn't get planted 8 or 10 years ago, and you can't get a tree. So again, what are the plans to put them in, and who's going to be responsible now, and where the heck are we getting them?
So sourcing was not something that we dove into too much. I think the thing that we learned about from the engagement about how to bring trees into neighborhoods is that it needs to be a continued community-led process. And so we have the priority areas that are identified. They've all been analyzed with respect to their canopy, where that canopy is, what sort of the challenge is to get to a 30% goal, with the understanding that 30% might not be the goal in every neighborhood, depending on where the available space, how people are feeling about trees in the neighborhood. Has the city maintained its commitment to maintaining the trees that are there? Are people ready to accept trees? So everything kind of has to move at the speed of trust. And so it's not really an easy answer. And sort of the answer is more engagement needed to include trees in neighborhoods. But we did, as part of the plan, do an in-depth analysis of each one of those priority areas to say how many street trees can be planted, how many trees do you need to plant every year for the next 30 years to get to 30%, because we're moving also at the speed of trees, right? Which can be difficult for people because it's a much longer timeline. And so all of that is there to help each of those communities develop tree plans for each of their neighborhoods, because there's not going to be a planting or growth plan that's going to work citywide. It needs to be specific to each locality. And so, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think what's really interesting about this is part of this is really about the process of making the tree plan, right? You're building an army of advocates. I'm sorry if you can hear that bird. I'm so sorry. They just think there's a tree right in here. But you're really building advocates along the way, and I think that really talks to a push for a larger public policy piece to this, right? If the people start to demand the trees, then maybe we can get to a policy that changes how we care for, which then gives us a different pot of money. So yeah. I don't know, if I know you're thinking like that.
Yeah.
Right now, the majority of trees that are the new trees that are going in are from PHS tree tenders or from the Tree Philly program, which is through Parks and Rec. There are street tree giveaways, yard tree giveaways, and there's sort of a lot of momentum to sort of find those trees and put them out. One thing we didn't mention was this: there's also a lot of interest in fruit trees and sort of like some native fruit bearing trees. Which they're also responding to. So right now, the new trees that are going in are from these giveaways, free giveaways. There is not currently a line item in the budget for planting new trees on public facilities. So we've been for parks. So we've been looking a lot at sort of succession planning, because there are a lot of really old trees in parks. There's a lot of old trees in neighborhoods as well. So making a plan that we're when those trees are coming down to make sure that new trees are going in their place.
And I think you answered this, but we have a question about who's taking care of trees in non-problematic areas. That's Parks and Rec.
Yeah, Parks and Rec is responsible right now for every tree in the right of way and on every public facility that is owned by the city. So. One of the things that is, we're focusing on priority areas because we have an equity issue, but it's not just priority areas, and there are blanket policy recommendations that deal with the entire city. One of those recommendations is to have a maintenance plan for the entire city, and a maintenance cycle that is not on a 10-year cycle, but on like a 3 to 5 year cycle. Right now, the way that tree issues are handled is it goes through 311, and you call and you get put on the list, and it could be a really, really long time, and you have no idea how long it's going to be. You don't know where you are on that list. The more you call your council person. All those things have an effect on how fast you get served, which also is an equitable solution. And so we did, as part of this plan, identify exactly what it would take to get to a proactive maintenance cycle as opposed to a reactive maintenance cycle, and identified the staffing for that. Guys, it's so little money. Like, what Parks and Rec needs, it's ridiculous. It's like a rounding error for William Penn that would take to fix all this with respect to funding in the Parks Department. It's really frustrating how little money it actually would take to fix a lot of this. It just needs the attention really of elected officials and an understanding that this is something that has value and is a return on investment and not a beautification project. I think that looking at trees as a public health infrastructure is actually the key, and understanding it as an environmental justice issue and bring all these voices to the fore that we heard as part of our process, so that elected officials understand that this is something that this is not a it would be nice if. This is a matter of life or death. In fact, there's a study, Michelle Kondo and Laura Roman, if you guys know those incredibly smart folks, did a study recently about we would save over 400 lives per year if we were at a 30% canopy cover citywide, which is remarkable. I mean, how do you put a price on that?
Yeah, I think I'm seeing now more things. There's another great study out called Return on Environment that links directly to this, and it's looking at the benefits of parks, not just in Sydney communities, in all Pennsylvania communities. So I think the more we advocate and can bring all of this together, the better, right? But the politicians are always key. Let's see, what else do we have? Oh, we have a great question about plans to advocate for healthier, more substantial tree pits, right? Because we know that we get our little tree coffins, and we still have streets department saying those are okay. I spend a lot of time talking about this at Civic Design Review until my eyes cross, like, please make the pit bigger. So what are you guys saying about this?
Design standards are part of the plan. So we don't, the design standards are not spelled out in the plan, but the need for the design standards are part of the plan, looking at and having soil volume requirements, like many other cities do. So not just how big is the tree pit, how much access to soil does it have, how much is that designed in. As part of development, that would be required. That would be a required part of the L&I building permit. We're also looking at integrating tree review into L&I in a way that actually changes the way that our cities are built. And so that putting some actual teeth in it, like holding certificates of occupancy, like all of these things, no more slaps on the wrist. Like, we really mean it. Trees are part of our good development.
Part of that is actually building capacity within Parks and Rec to be able to review the tree plans, because right now the development plans sort of like roll across the street tree team at the very end. So at the very end, when there isn't really an opportunity to make substantial change, only to be like, oh, can't fit a tree there. That's too bad. Yeah. So I think moving that review process a little bit earlier will hopefully make it possible to coordinate tree locations with development before it's too late.
It's also cheaper to pay a tree bond than it is to plant a tree right now.
Yes, we didn't get much into that, but there is a complicated tree bond system that we heard in our stakeholder reviews that everyone dislikes. But to sort of the money that's held, whether you plant a tree or not, and then you have to request to get the money back. But as Ari pointed out, the money that's held in that bond is typically less money than to plant a tree, so it's not currently an incentive to plant trees.
Go ahead, Ari.
I wanted to respond to Nate Wooten's comment about natural lands. Hi, Nate. And because that's actually a really important one. Natural lands and parks make up 40% of our total canopy cover, which is kind of insane. Natural lands are also not a given. It's not something that just happen. It's something that are under threat from climate change, from invasive species. They are woefully underfunded. There's 5,000 acres of natural lands, and like I think it's one person who is a field staff person, which is kind of mind blowing. And so all of that is the case for that is spelled out in the plan, as well as what natural land staffing request is and their funding request is spelled out in the plan as a significant recommendation, so that we can preserve and protect those that so many people talked about the Wissahickon as being so important to their ability to live in the city, and mine included. So yeah, that's incredibly important and absolutely part of the plan.
Great. We have a question coming up about how a sense of green city, clean water, how that has really helped or hindered, right? And I would also tie that to some of the major universities really have some good tree planting, pit planting details, trench planting. Oh, I couldn't get there. And those sort of and they're finding out that actually they get better street trees, it reduces their long-term costs, all the things you've talked about. So I wonder about how these programs, including Green City, are helping or hindering, and how you're linking into them.
Water department, as you can imagine, was very much involved in almost all of our meetings. They show up to every meeting and are very and participate and are great partners. As of now, trees are not really given significant credit with respect to the EPA mandate. That doesn't seem likely to change. But we do need to have better coordination with them with respect to the projects, the GSI projects that go on, and make sure that new trees aren't being planted where GSI projects are planned, and that trees are strongly encouraged as part of those GSI projects, even if they are not necessarily given significant credit for the stormwater function that they have. I personally would very much like to see trees be given more of a credit rating for stormwater, because they do absolutely contribute to evapotranspiration and stormwater management, but that does not seem to be forthcoming in the short term or the long term for that matter.
That is wrestling our civil engineers.
For reals. It's hard to wrestle civil engineers, as you and I both know. And I'm the son of a civil engineer, probably the most flexible civil engineer I've ever met.
Well, and the problem becomes, I've been asked by civil engineers, like, which is the best tree for stormwater management? And I always say, well, the one that's alive.
Yeah, the biggest one.
So. What else do we have? We have a comment from Kat about thoughts or comments on current heritage tree protection.
I can address that one. There was a study looking at, so right now, heritage trees are defined as being greater than 24 inches DBH. So that's the sort of the diameter at breast height. And they are, there's a list of trees that are considered heritage trees. So if you look at those two things, both the list and the size, it accounts for less than 2% of the trees in our city are actually considered heritage trees, which is not very many. So it's true that the current heritage tree protections are quite weak. We do have recommendations to strengthen those, to reduce the size and include more trees in there, with the hopes of those. At least, one of the things that we heard in the engagement, again, over and over again, were sort of the impacts felt by communities when a large tree is taken down in a neighborhood, right? Even if that tree is in the backyard of some adjacent property or somewhere or on a vacant lot that has been used, that has been developed, sort of the impact felt by residents when these large trees come down is very large, and oftentimes is a surprise. And so trying to find ways to put more trees under the protection of heritage trees. There's still, there's always going to be ways that the heritage tree can't be preserved or used. There's mitigation options that there can be, but trying to make more of those trees fall under heritage tree classification so that residents will at least be notified when those trees are going to be removed.
We have a comment from Paul that he's saying he hopes they are hoping that the PABMP manual will give trees more credit. So I want to make sure that people are aware of that. We've had a bit of a slowdown in questions rolling through, but I would love to talk a bit about, and you touched on this, but what are the ways that we can help? How can we help to vault this? I'm sure you have some top 10, and I'm sure everyone here can be pretty loud.
Plant a tree. All right, I'll let you.
Yeah. So when the plan does go live, there is going to be a significant advocacy push. We're working with the Philadelphia Parks Alliance and the Philadelphia Parks and Rec in particular is going to be, and Parks Alliance is going to be very much pushing for a lot of the policy. Some of the policy recommendations are already sort of underway before the plan has even been published, because we've been having so many conversations already over the past year, while others are going to be a little bit harder to get going. There were questions about funding and fundraising. We do have in the policy recommendations concepts for fee and lieu programs for development that will support some of that, but this is going to be a massive funding lift, and it's probably not going to come all from the city, and so there's definitely going to be, if our philanthropic community here in Philadelphia recognizes trees as an environmental justice issue, as a public health infrastructure issue. That's how we need to be talking about trees in Philadelphia, not as beautification, but as something that is a right for all people to have access to green and to trees. And the more that we can all speak about trees in that way, I feel like the more likely we are to see the philanthropic community step up and the political community step up.
Great. And I think that brings us, Nathaniel has asked a question that I know is burning in a lot of people's minds about responding and commenting on natural land and canopy losses. Of course, everybody's been looking at the Cobbs Creek golf course. I'd like to start this by saying, in my opinion, this really was made able to happen when Fairmount Park, in fact, got merged, when the commission got disbanded and it really got merged into the city. And I think when that happened, people didn't really realize the protections of parks that were going to get taken away. It was a sad day, and lots of landscape architects, and I'm sure other people were upset. But we are where we are. And so, Alexa, you knew you were gonna have to answer this.
I knew that Cobbs Creek Golf Course was going to come up. It's also super unfortunate because Cobbs Creek was one of our. We had a bunch of great ambassadors from that neighborhood as well. I did not. We even in our conversations with all of the tree people in Philadelphia did not know that was coming, and were just as surprised as everyone else when it did happen. As Tavis alluded, there are many of the requirements for development and sort of the things that we have in our zoning does not apply to the city-owned land and parks. So the same sort of regulations that we're requiring of other people, we're not requiring of ourselves, of the city itself. So that's, I think, definitely one of the bigger problems at bay there. But and as much as I hate to say this, because it was a dramatic loss of trees in Philadelphia, I think it has sort of jump-started the advocacy push that I think that this tree plan can use moving forward, because that was done without any notification of those folks that were living close by to it. It was, I don't know, I'm still sort of struggling with that. It's a huge, huge loss.
We are making recommendations for the city to be in compliance with all development code. So with respect to trees, so no more exemption for the city on that front. And so that if the recommendations had been in place, that would not have happened, as well as a lot more notification. So yeah, as Alexa said, I hope that unfortunate loss of very old trees is going to help politicians recognize that people do in fact care about trees, and you can't just remove them with no impact or penalty to your political to your own political aspirations.
Oh, I'm just going to laugh and laugh. Yeah, right. But the rules need to be even, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
you talked about the biggest takeaway as, really 99.9% of people love trees. And, the flip side of that was people hated them because they really couldn't care for them. Did you get people who hated them for other reasons? My favorite I've ever heard is birds. They bring birds, which is very funny as our little bird here sings in the office. So what were the other reasons that people didn't want them?
I think the number one issue is going to be sidewalk uplift. That is, again, is a financial burden of having to manage that sidewalk. But we heard them all, right? Sort of like fruit mess dropping on your car, birds pooping on your car when they're in the tree, leaves. I mean, I have a neighbor that hates trees because she doesn't want to have to sweep the leaves, right? I mean, they are a responsibility.
Sure. And did you have anybody have like a come to trees us moment when when they had gone through the process and they'd been ambassadors and they were like, well, I hated trees, but now I really love them because I see a way forward?
No. No, I don't think so.
It wasn't really. It wasn't really the purpose of
Sure.
that.
Sure. No, I just wondered because sometimes it's sort of incredible when people say like, boy, I just thought this was going to be one way and it was another. Anyway, well, I'm not seeing a lot more questions come in, so I want to make sure of that. I'm looking around. I don't see any hands raised, Eli. But I want to. Alexa has questions.
No, I don't. I was modeling the
behavior.
To ask
but
more questions.
I want to make sure you guys have an opportunity just to leave us with whatever you want to leave us with. And I want to thank you. Eli probably has something to say, but I just want to make sure you can make like that final big statement about whatever.
Let me say my little bit, because mine are just announcements, and then they can send us out on a high. So this will go up on our website in the next couple of days. So if you check back and want to share this with anyone, you can send them the YouTube link. We'll be back in May talking about the Delaware waterfront. So all sorts of good stuff coming up. Again, if you want to get involved with anything DAG related, dagfellow@gmail.com. Thank you both so much. This is wonderful. And thank you, Tavis, for hosting. So yes, please take us out.
Well, I would like to say when the plan does come out, we are going to be counting on all of you guys here to help advocate for it and help to, hold your neighbors as much as your local council representation to accountable to the things that are in there and the things that are important. I'm gonna double back on what Ari said of how I would like for us to be talking about the urban forest moving forward, which is, again, out of this sort of, it's not about beautification. It's not about, putting trees in places where people don't necessarily want them, right? But it is understanding trees as crucial public health infrastructure that is quite literally the matter of life or death to folks in this city, especially looking at climate change and resilience and moving forward. Trees have so many benefits from both heat reduction and health benefits that we need them. We need them in our lives, especially in the city. Great.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for coming. We'll give you our virtual applause as we tend to here at DAG. Tavis is putting something blurry up against the screen that is not working with her blurred background. But everyone, go have a wonderful day, and we'll reconnect in May for our next presentation. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us. All right. Bye.